In this lesson, we'll talk about the concept of candidate moves and how to reach that correct thinking process. Do you think in terms of candidate moves when you play?
Hmm. Well, I have to say that Elisabeth Peetz, who is my German coach, she is a huge favor of candidate moves. She's talking about candidate moves all the time, and she says it is very, very important to have them on your mind at all times. And when you think about some candidate moves, then there's a possibility the game has already gone into the middle game often enough, and then you have a couple of good choices on what to move next. And it's always the most difficult.
Yes, and it's so true that it's one of the most important things in chess, I think. Um, so the first person to ever introduce it was Korov in his books.
Uh-huh.
And he had this sort of idea of tree of analysis method. And then Dvoretsky, who was a really good world-class trainer on calculation, also refined that concept and making it less machine-like and more ideas-based. And so today we'll learn a few concepts. They're just concepts to keep in mind when you're
Mhm.
thinking, like comparison, like prophylaxis against your opponent's ideas, and we will just see a few examples and walk through the thinking process together.
Cool. I'm totally in for that. I'm always happy to learn something new. Let's see.
So first, I want to introduce the concept of comparison. We all know how to find the moves, like the checks, the captures, the threats, so maybe we won't talk about that as much today. But I think that often you find yourself in a situation where you have maybe two or three options, and you have to evaluate the subtle differences between them. So what are some options that you see here for white, and how would you go about choosing only one of them?
Good. We have obviously the checks, which is rook on f8. It's a check. But there's another check, and it's a bit more hidden. It's the queen going to all the way to a8.
That's exactly the two
Yep.
options here, and we'll be choosing between that.
Yeah. On my first look, it looks as if queen to a8 almost forces black to move the queen to d8, because if the king moves, it's a checkmate on f8. Simple as that. I think there's no other moves. And having said that, if we have a candidate move where a move is forced, this is what I learned, then we can follow up on this and see how good the follow up will be after all. Well, I guess I don't see too many tactics. There is another check on f8, it doesn't help. There is a check on d5, it doesn't help. Our rook is still attacked. So what happens if we just swap? Queen takes, rook takes. And now we have to deal with taking on d3. So if our rook goes back to f3, I believe if I count correctly, it's 5 to at least 6. So white has a pawn more, but it's probably a draw. Let's see.
That's a very fair assessment. Yeah, so that's kind of probably the not exact this is not the end of the line because we'll see
Yeah.
what happens in the game, but you would be very right to see that basically forced and then get into this end game. So then good, that's going to be our first option. What about the other?
Option number 2 is the check on f8. The king has to move up. It's again forced. King to g7. And now we have it looks like a very straightforward check on f6. With the queen, the king also again is forced to move to h6. And here it feels like there is something boiling. What, for example? Now we have a lot of options, I think. I mean, I guess we would like to... We would like to get the rook to f7 and threaten queen to g7. But then we have to deal with queen to g4 check. And I think that is at least a draw because our king can only move back and forth. And we are trapped in this horrible circle of pesky checks. So
Mm-hmm.
that does not work. However, what if we make a Zwischenmove or something? Oh, there's so many nice ways to deal with this, perhaps. What, for example, would be with the move f3? I
Yeah,
mean,
you could play something like f3, maybe even h3 a little bit better.
oh yeah,
That prevents queen there. Here we would have to calculate a lot of stuff. We would have to calculate this too.
yeah, that's true. Yes, yes. So
And
out of a
I'm not
sudden,
sure where the checks are.
it gets very complicated and probably doesn't look so good. So, but
But
it still looks as if there is something which I missed.
it feels like it, and I totally agree with you because that check looks so tempting. But then there's just not enough checks in the end because black's position is also pretty active and
Hmm.
like they just need one move to start attacking our king too. So is actually no purpose to queen f6, but there is maybe one more try to consider.
Okay. What if we what if we what if we don't see it yet. What could we do here? I would love to deflect the queen from the rook and give a check and try to capture the rook. But that doesn't really work. Ah, again, I'm struggling here. And h3 on its own is also not the very best move. What are you saying, Newton? Any idea?
Oh,
Hmm? You're
now you have a helper.
not really helping. Not really helping. So, no, I don't know. What would be, so now you have to help me. I mean, what would be a
Okay.
good way to deal with this situation? I don't
Yeah,
know
so
a
this
real
is the
thing about.
hard part
Yeah.
of the puzzle, I would say, is to getting to that position from that very start and then finding the other move. Queen f6 looks so obvious, but there's one move that I think escapes our attention a little bit because it's not something we're used to, and it's something like rook to b8. So there is a huge threat of rook b7, of course, and of queen f8. So black's basically only option is to go for that queen trade. And then we get to this ending. What do you think
Okay.
about the ending and compare it to the other one?
Well, our king is a bit closer to the pawn on d3. And maybe that is enough to have a much bigger advantage. Also, the check on b7 is a threat, and of course, taking on b4 is another threat. So, in other words, that might actually be winning for white now.
Yeah, so I think the biggest difference is the rook, is that it's so much more active on b8 than it is on f3 in that
Hmm.
previous line. And it's like a small difference, but I think oftentimes in endgames like that, it can make a difference. I mean, maybe the computer would still hold this, but I think that the advantage kind of tips over to white side now. And I think when you're just evaluating this from a practical point of view, you only really have these two options. And if you compare that, then even that slight difference is how you get to the right candidate move. So what happened in the game is that white missed it and played with the queen
Oh,
a8 idea, and maybe white overlooked this move in the first place. But there's
ooh,
b3, and after capture, they took like this, but c3 was an option too, but even this sort of gives black enough counterplay for perhaps make a draw.
mm.
But the game itself, yeah, ended in a draw because black had enough things to do with the rook, even though that extra pawn is definitely something you can push for the win, but it wasn't enough because black has a very active rook and white has a very passive rook. So that's when the pawn starts mattering a little bit less. But if they had gone for that previous option, then maybe the rook situation would have been different, and if white wins another pawn on that side, it could have ended completely differently that game.
I feel a little better that the probably master of chess also missed the winning move just like I did. But yeah,
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense to also, when you have those forced combinations, to look at some moves which are just a little bit more silent.
Yeah. But really this is just about like comparison.
Mhm.
You just compare the two, and you try to look at these, of course, the concrete lines, but also just the comparison of your pieces. Do your pieces stand better in one line over the other? Now, there's a second concept. So this is our next example, and it's going to be when do you calculate and when do you stop calculating? I think it's always a bit tough to understand when you should go into the depth of a line and when you probably shouldn't. So in this position, black goes castles, and Tarash playing as white here. You have to go through his thinking process and tell me what you would calculate for white.
Oof. Well, we can take on e5, and that will start a huge swapping experience probably. Now it is continuing. Do we take on d7 first or on
Yeah,
e5? And yeah, so
true.
there's a
A lot
check
of
on
swapping.
f3, etc., etc. So it's very
Yeah,
complicated, and it requires a lot of calculation, as you already just mentioned.
not exactly that requires calculation, but yes, that too.
Okay. Then we would just have the opportunity to, I think it's legit to just push the pawn to d5.
Also,
Close a little
yeah.
bit. I mean, the knight could go to b4. Yeah, exactly. We swap, and yeah, h3 makes sense. Yes,
Yep. So white is
but
slightly better here, yeah. But
um, there's another option, I guess. Probably. What is the goal for white here? What does white really want, I
there's a
wonder?
very forcing option right now.
Yeah,
The most forcing one of all.
I probably think it is taking on c6. Then we go
Yep.
take on e5.
Yeah. So if they take back like this, then we just win a pawn.
Yeah,
But the bishop is more complicated. So what happens here? And how would you, like, when would you stop calculating this line?
I see. Well, I don't know. After taking on e5, I don't see how black can escape with any more. Am I missing something? I don't see
Okay, I'll
it.
take back.
Now we take with the queen. Exchange
Yeah.
queens, I mean.
Yeah, exactly. Not this
No,
because
no. Now out of a
that
sudden
is,
we are missing this. Yeah.
yep,
So
we're
we
missing a
exchange the
pawn.
queens,
Yeah.
and then finally we
Now you see the problem.
oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, obviously, for you at home, what I was calculating is we can just easily win a pawn on e5, but that's not the case, because after taking back on e4, which is an option, um, how to take back actually with the bishop, because otherwise we
Yeah,
could take the bishop on c6. So we take back with the bishop,
exactly.
or black takes back. Oh,
This wins for
yeah,
white.
this one's for right. Yeah.
So yes,
So I have to
bishop.
take back with the bishop. And if the knight would take back now, because we would like obviously win a piece, but no, there is a back rank made for
Yeah.
black. That is a little unfortunate. So what happens? Is there any way to get out of this? I mean,
Basically, would you in your game, would you stop at around this point thinking that, okay, I don't win a pawn as I thought, or do you like would you go a bit further?
I wouldn't go further, but there's probably reason to go further because, of course, as we are looking at this position, there is the rook on the e file looking at eyeing two bishops. So
Hmm.
it's definitely not over here, unfortunately.
Yeah. The way to determine whether you should go further or not is if it's forcing or not. If this position was not super forcing and like your next
I
best move
see.
was like h3, then okay, you don't need to do
Yeah,
that. But
yeah.
here, maybe a few more.
Yeah, I mean, what happens if we just simply play f3?
I
Is
guess the bishop can take on c2 as well.
Yeah, and then
Or maybe even bishop
okay.
c5, I
Yeah,
like.
bishop c5 is really annoying. Good, never mind. Um takes. Okay, I
Okay,
mean, look,
I'll
we
give
take
you
take.
takes.
Yeah, we
Takes is
take and
correct.
then bishop on f4.
Close, like you're on the right track. So it's a good move in general, and like that's what you would play in
Mhm.
this position if the tactic was not there. But we do want to make use of these two pieces, like you said, on the e file. So what is in the way?
The knight. So knight
Yeah.
d3 would be even better, probably.
Perfect, because here it
Yeah,
closes that
I see.
file. So now, does black have a forcing move? Yes, because there's only one move to defend it. F5,
Oh,
because
that's the only
otherwise one
one.
of the pieces gets lost.
Okay, so and the problem is, oh, is there? No, there is no problem. After
The problem
f3,
is that that's a forcing move, and that
yeah,
means we have to keep going.
yeah, after f3, yeah, that's another problem. But after f3, we have the move you mentioned already earlier, which is the check on c5,
Yeah.
which gets our bishop or the opponent's bishop out of the way. And if we take,
Yeah.
everything is more or less equal.
Is
So,
it?
oh my gosh, it's horrible. Bishop g5 and then bishop e7.
Yeah. The only thing black can do to try is this. And then,
Well, now we just, I guess c4.
yeah. And then we win, I guess, the exchange
Yeah.
or the piece.
That is such a nice example. My goodness.
But it is very hard because it just keeps going and going. And for some reason, all these moves are just forcing. And it's tough to know at which point you just
How many?
stop. But I think
Yes. How
at
many?
in such examples, if it is forcing, especially like here, there's a very clear threat, very clear
True.
um, defense of the piece. It's a good idea to sort of, yeah, to train yourself. Of course, we're not always going to see all of this, and sometimes we'll miss these things, um, but that's how you kind of decide back here which candidate move to really focus on and which ones to just let them be.
This is fabulous. This a famous example, or where did you find that?
Yeah, it is relatively
Yeah.
famous, I guess. Tarash played it as white, so
Yeah, 1892, everybody. Unbelievable. This is very beautiful to me because as you,
yeah.
yeah, you mentioned completely right. Everything is more or less forced, but you have to think ahead for how many moves were there. This is what I'm curious
So
about.
from move 8 until move 18, 10. Really
This
hard.
is how much you have to think forward, but it is probably one of the easiest calculations because, as you mentioned already, there's so many forced moves. The last piece is so difficult if you have everything in your head and then you have to find
Yeah.
c4, I think.
Yeah, there's no
Yeah,
branches,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so yeah, that's helpful for us.
Very fun.
Okay. uh, Maybe one or two more.
Hmm.
The third concept is going to be this position, and it's the one that I struggle a lot with, is that when everything looks good, everything looks kind of the same. It's a slower position where you feel like everything looks relatively good. So what do you do here as white? And what do you do in general when you're in such a situation where you have most things you want, things are going well, you're pretty developed? Um, what do you think the answer to that is?
Well, you can always try to get one of your pieces into a better position.
Perfect. I think Elizabeth really cooked here.
um, so, and then we have to look at what could be our worst piece. And, well, there's the bishop on e2, which is very, very misplaced. There's also the knight on c2, which could have potentially a better square, maybe b4. Maybe we don't need this knight anymore that much. Something like that. So yeah, but bishop e2 comes to mind. Also our queen, of course. We can also get our queen better. So we have three or roughly three candidates, maybe two. If you're a better player, then probably two. So what do we do with this info? I
Yes,
mean,
that's good. Like concepts wise, now you can maybe think of just some moves.
yeah. So I'm looking at knight b4. I guess if black takes the knight and we take back, then that's a very nice pin so far.
Yeah,
Also, our
that looks actually pretty good as well, but I think when we have more space, like why maybe black is not going to take.
yeah, I thought
We
so
kind of
too.
shouldn't really offer that
Okay,
because his knight on e7 has nowhere like has nothing
that's
to do.
actually also true. And yeah, and the more I think about it, the more a5 is just pushing us back, and we're no
Yeah,
further at
that's actually
all.
true. A5 is probably a good move.
Um,
That knight has another dream in life.
yeah,
Yeah,
taking on d4.
that would be great, but no. Like there's something like
Okay, thank you.
what?
And this is, yeah, why you're struggling. Yeah. Now I see it too. So
What is
what
it?
if the knight makes the crazy move a1 to
Yeah,
go to
and
b3
makes
and
it.
has the beauty of c5? You more or less gave the hint.
Yeah.
That
It's
is
so
the
hard
dream
to see,
spot.
but once
Yeah.
you see it, you're like, yeah, that's the one.
So
That's where
here's
it's going.
once again, Elisabeth Peetz often tries to give me the hint like this and says, like, if you could place this misplaced knight anywhere on the board where it would be perfect, where would this
Yeah.
be? And then often enough, it's like c5 is looks like a stunner.
I fully agree. I think it's so good to do that even in your games. Like when the position is not forcing. When nothing
Yeah.
is being forced, then that's probably one of the best ways to think about it. And this position is not forcing, like you shouldn't try to lash out with like f5 or e5. There is a move like h4 though, which I thought you would
Yeah, I
like.
thought about this.
Looks pretty good too. This would have been a good option as well. Um, but yeah, moves like all of these moves like queen f2, bishop d1, they're all pretty good.
Bishop
But I think it's
d1.
feels
Yeah.
good to play something with like a very clear plan. And there's no better time to do this than now when the opponent also doesn't have anything super forcing. So the game continued like this, and it looks like just good, not much. Okay, we improved one piece, but if we just keep doing that, then the opponent's position actually just falls apart. And that's what happened very, very shortly with white just making usual moves, improving one more piece um, of the bishop, trying to go there. And what do you think? Okay, this one I just like. I think it's a cute maneuver. What is our next piece, you think, that will be improved?
I'm taking a look. Oh, it's bishop c2, bishop b1, bishop a2. Is it?
Yeah, We just have
Nice.
time to do that. Of course, we're not always gonna have that time, but that's just one important concept of candidate moves, I think, is to do that, improving the pieces that need to be improved.
Wow.
You can't, even if it's wrong, at least you're going in the right direction, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, um, I guess a bad plan is better than no plan is another saying
Mm-hmm.
for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But here it
Mm-hmm.
just ends up being good as well. Okay, so then last example, you're doing amazing. This is from my own game where I had to make sort of a decision relying on a few candidate moves, and then I didn't make the right one, which is why it was so memorable. So, white to play. What would you consider and finally play as white? So for the record, like this is comes from an opening, and I knew that white has to be better. So that probably played with my head as well because I knew this was suboptimal for my opponent, and I knew that okay, white has to have something good, maybe not winning, but just there has to be something good. Um, and that sometimes that maybe does you a disservice too.
So here's what I would have played, okay? And
Yeah.
it's probably wrong, but I just want to get it out of my head. I would have taken on f6 with check.
Yeah.
Bishop takes back. Queen c2 with the threat
Yeah.
of taking on h7, which probably has to be dealt with.
G6, H6, let's say
And
H6.
now long castling.
Yeah, so actually I think you should play my tournaments instead.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Because I spent like, I don't know, 20 minutes, something more, and then didn't find that.
Yeah, but
And
it's
it takes you 1 minute.
I'm not 100% sure how optimal it is. I mean, I'm still looking at rook b8, queen b6. This is something you don't want to deal with, right? So perhaps this is why you didn't
Yes.
play it. I mean, queen b6 is the next one, and then it's only one move away. Oh no, it isn't. There's a bishop on g3. Anyway, it's a bit scary. Maybe let's say it like that.
Okay, but you got it. Your intuition was exactly right.
Wow.
So just coming back to this position, the options are, yeah, you could take on f6, which is forcing, that's good. You could go for something like h4.
Hmm.
Could go for something like short castle, could go for queen e2. I also considered queen e2 seriously, so maybe queen e2 would also be good, pretty equivalent.
Yeah.
But after this, we are still within that choice of do I castle long, but then that's a little dangerous. Um, but this would have also been a good option to just go for long castle. And this is actually pretty tough to figure out what to do against black's attack as
Hmm.
well. But overall, if you see this and then something like knight g5, mutual chances, but white is the one pushing a little bit more and better. So that's one option. Something like short castle is just not really in the spirit of the position. That's not really where the action is. And something like h4 is a bit early because we don't really get much out of it. Black has f5 to defend everything, and it's not clear what white's pieces are doing.
Hmm.
So naturally, by considering like all of that, I was like, okay, knight f6 looks good, and that's exactly the solution you came to as well. And here, queen c2 looks very natural, develop plus attack at the same time. We didn't talk about g6, but that's h4, and I think
Yeah,
looks pretty good.
h4.
I would even take that with something like that. But here was the other important decision, I believe. And it's deciding between short castle and long castle.
Hmm.
Or just, I guess, not castling at all and playing maybe h4. So are you in clear favor of long castle?
No, of course not. I think actually, the more I look at it, short castle might be even more beneficial. What I'm really uh, finding strange is that this is the third time, I think, or the second at least, that I missed the move h4. Such a move that I
So
play.
untypical, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I didn't even mention it. Yeah. So back to the castling. I mean, castling short is so much safer. Let's be real here. Also, positionally, we can just get the rook to d1. Right after that, we can get our bishop to e4. And the threat, which I mentioned earlier with the rook b8, which is still not working, by the way, and the queen to
Yeah,
b6,
actually,
it's not that big of a threat anymore. So short castling, if it would be a real game, if I would play this, I would probably short castle.
but if it was a blitz game,
I would long castle any day of the week.
yeah, exactly. So that's the really tough decision here, which is why it took me like 20 minutes to decide. Um, Maybe we can just let go of h4 because that's not really the big question. The big question is where we castle. Here we still need to make that exact same decision. So deciding between the two of these, the right answer is actually long castle. And we both had that intuition that this looks so good, but comparing these two candidate moves, I was relying too much on the calculation and trying to understand all the complicated lines that come after, when in reality, if you were to look at this position with just like fresh eyes and had to explain this to somebody, you would be like, of course you long castle. Look at the attack that you can have going on the other one, on the other side. So I think sometimes what you would play in a heartbeat and what is really more in the spirit of the position is sometimes more correct if it can be supported by that. So the reason why this is good is actually a bit subtle too. So the queen definitely comes to attack on this side, and there are things to worry about. But for the advantage, we have a few forcing lines like this, and it's good here to find, it's needed here to find rook d7 or rook d6, something like that. Because if you play a3, you kind of lose some of the advantage and it goes back to being around equal. But rook d7 gives a huge advantage. But yeah, it's a bit it's a bit shaky to leave that hanging. But once you see it, then you do see that white is the one dominating and having really, really big threats.
100%.
You're not convinced?
Yeah, I am, because it's black doesn't have time to shut the diagonal off of the bishop on g3, which I'm missing the fourth time in a row, I think.
Yeah, that bishop is so
There's just
sneaky.
not a rook b8. If there would be a rook b8, if the bishop would be on, I don't know, d2, for example,
Yeah. Now, if
I
you're a
think it would be
grandmaster, you
trickier.
will say, okay, but my calculation doesn't stop here. There's knight to d4 forcing move, and okay, that's a bit, it gets crazy, but this is black's best reply. So it's just, it gets really
Oh
messy, but I
my
don't think it's necessary to see knight
goodness.
d4 all the way from
It is
there.
so tricky out of a sudden.
Yeah, it's really messy. I don't like it. So maybe maybe it's good. I don't know. I still think it's you have to long castle in such a position. So that's why it was such a memorable decision that I regretted a lot. But yeah, knight d4 is not exactly findable, but that's where black probably has the most counterplay. But if they just do something normal like this, there is no chance for them to really survive. And they're already in huge trouble with these pieces, and they have to, I guess, stay like this, which is just a amazing attacking position for white.
Okay, here's one last question.
Yeah.
If you calculate, you have the long castle, and then you see the move rook d7, and then you see the move knight d4. Isn't this where you're thinking like, oh, I cannot castle long? This is what I would be thinking.
True. But for that to for them to play that, like there has to be a specific, like a concrete reason that yes, it works. Which it does work to give black counterplay, yes, but we're also winning a piece in the process for not really much. Like we're not getting mated yet. So for me, it would take like, okay, does black have something specific for the piece? And if they don't, then you just trust that this is fine.
So after queen b1, you say, oh my god. Okay. However, yeah, you get a piece. You cannot underestimate that. And then there has to be some good defending and
Play rook d1
calculating.
and you escape. It's just my idea, but
Oh
I don't.
god, but d4 takes d4, opening the file.
What if I just run?
Oh, with the
No.
king.
I mean, that's just one idea. I don't know. I just thought of it now. But also there's the rook c7, there's bishop c, like we can cover
Yeah,
maybe.
probably. I'm just not seeing those moves. Interesting, right? So out of a sudden you're a bit, or I'm a bit scared in this position. I
Of
think the
course.
weaker a player you are, the more scared you are. So often enough, if I'm playing a club player in my level or a bit lower, and I'm having a threat like that, they will try anything to defend that. They don't even want to have the threat. They don't want to deal with it. It feels like for them
Yeah.
they didn't buy a ticket and they have to deal with like not getting caught. And they don't want to go
Yeah.
through the
No, for
stress.
sure. It's so fair to like be worried about that, and I mean something inside me was worried about that too, which is why we went for short castle, and I regretted that decision so much later because now, okay, now there's no attack, now there's nothing. Eventually I won the game, but the conversion was super long, and there was no attack ever in sight.
I see.
So I think the main idea of this example is that yes, you need to combine the candidate moves with some calculation, but also what objectively like seem like feels right. So it has to be your candidate moves have to be right positionally. Otherwise, you're stuck with some irreversible decisions, whether it's a pawn move, a king being stuck on the other side. So you need to kind of understand what the position needs a bit more of, and then try to make that candidate move work in your favor rather than making something that you think works calculation wise, but it's bad for your position otherwise. I would rely more, this is good for my position, so I'll try to make it work. If it doesn't, then okay, you move on. But if it does, then you should try to make it work.
Love it. That's also why I love your courses. So thank you for this wonderful lesson. And thank you, everybody, for watching. We see each other in
Next time.
September, probably. Yeah.
True.
Yeah. So until then, bye-bye.
Bye.